The next polis we want to review as we look at the grander organization of Greek civilization is we want to look at the formation of the polis of Athens. Now, like I said, there are many different polies, many different city-states in Greece, each one of them having their own unique political and other developments. But what they do all have in common is they speak essentially the same language, have essentially the same geography and culture, and the basic economy and food that unites them all. But in terms of politics, the Greeks are in this time period extremely jealous of their own independence, extremely interested in maintaining their own sense of political authority, laws, inheritance, control of territory, and very little cooperation between the individual Greek city-states exists. When we looked at Sparta, we saw essentially the penultimate example, the ultimate example of a city-state that is a military state, one that made each citizen, in that case Spartan citizen, a cog in a machine who was then of course controlling the slavery population underneath them and was constantly ready for a military invasion or mindset. What we want to cover here quickly before we talk more specifically about Athens is we want to talk about the creation of various kinds of political ideas, all right? Now, many of these are words that have their origins in Greek, but we still use them to this day in terms of how we're going to create different kinds of governmental systems. As we have moved into the more modern era now, we're going to start to use some of these Greek terms like monarchy and oligarchy and democracy. They all have in their history a relationship back to some kind of Greek political theory, and we're going to use them now and into the future as we go through various other civilizations and time frames. My point is this. Let's take a look at some of the ideas that they have. One, what if you organized a society's political and legal and justice systems around a religious faith? A theocracy, a state organized and controlled by a religious idea in tandem with and sometimes indistinguishable from the law. We'll see examples of this later on in Western civilization. For example, if you want to look at a modern state that is a theocracy, think in terms of the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, and his control over the city, Vatican City, right? Essentially, a religious leader is also a political leader of an entity, Vatican City. That's an example of a theocracy. There are other opportunities. Greek civilization also is going to have things like monarchies, where there is a royal family, and the next king and the next series of queens all come from the same families, and that essentially by birth, your next political leader has already been chosen, and that you're going to know who the next generation of leader is by looking at the royal family. Not through election, not through drawing cards out of a hat, but essentially knowing that the monarch, the royal family, is going to continue and that they're going to provide the next leader and the leader after that. That will also be something that will be very powerful as we move forward in Western civilization. We've seen many monarchies in both Judah and Israel, and of course in Egypt and Mesopotamia. So this is not a new idea to us, but the specific terminology is Greek. We're also going to be talking a little bit about people power. The power of the people, democracy. This is also going to be a Greek political concept. Now, it may not agree exactly with your concept of democracy, but the very broad nature of that idea will be something we'll be looking at as we move forward. And let's recognize that when we are looking at and talking about democracy, we cannot help but start with the Greek idea of it and then compare what our modern conception is against the ancient one. We also are going to be talking in general about oligarchy. Another way to phrase this is essentially committee rule. The elite people, based on wealth or landholding or individual family clans. This is essentially committee government. The elite, a large group usually, of elite people are the ones who are running a society. Not just a singular person with, say, like theocracy or monarchy. Not everyone in the context of democracy, but some small select group. And we'll be looking at Western civilization, lots of places where this will also be a very popular kind of government, where there's a small group, generally very elite economically, who are in charge of running the society and the culture. There's also going to be a special group called tyrants. Tyranny is the idea of one-man rule like dictatorship, But it's not like a monarchy in the sense that they're there generation after generation. Tyranny, or what we'll see later on in Rome, dictatorship, is the idea that there's one person in charge of government. They're going to be doing this on an emergency basis, and that once they have done their duty, saved the state in a war or reorganized society, they will then move on to the next concept. And then the government will revert back to some other system. Now, there are multiple kinds of city-states in and around the Greek cultural area. Each one of them is going to have some sort of elements of any one or a combination of these ideas. We just want to lay the terminology out now, and hopefully you're seeing the same terminology in the book that you're using to make sure that when they're using this kind of political term, you have a general sense of what they're trying to do and trying to set you up for and understand how a society is being controlled. All right? In the case of what we're going to talk about now, we want to talk about Athens and the creation over time of an idea that you're going to recognize as democracy. Now, it's not going to be the same kind of democracy you might think about in the 21st century. Because, for example, the Greek idea of democracy is not going to include women. It's not going to include, in most cases, foreigners. If you're an immigrant into a new city, you usually do not have citizenship rights, including the right to vote and participate. Also, there's going to be forms of democracy where, for example, we'll talk about Periclean Athens in the next section, but what we're going to think about is here's a politician who's going to start to provide people with an income to serve on juries or to participate in government, which means that you can be any citizen of the city-state to participate. You didn't have to already be wealthy. Who can take a whole day off from work? Or two, the elite always could, but the people down in the economic ladder lower down never could. We'll be talking about that idea later. Is that going to help create democracy? Genuine, full, complete, and able ability to work in governmental office, to vote, to have your voice heard. That's going to be the kind of thing we're going to look at in Athens. We're going to be looking for the origins of a true democracy. Now, inside this origin, there's lots of legendary stories in early Greek society of various kinds of monarchies and various kinds of oligarchies, and they're instructive in the sense that we get the idea that Greek city-states have not decided directly on exactly what kind of government they want. Social conditions, economic conditions, military victories or losses, individual rise of tyrants. There's lots and lots of change. So change is almost a constant in these Greek city-states. Instead, what I'd like to think about here for a second is just focusing on the basics of Athens and looking at their story. In the context of looking at Athens, it's not a democracy overnight. There are a series of steps that need to take place to get Athens towards being a participatory democracy, but it does not happen overnight. So let's think about this for a second. In Athenian history, there is a famous man, his name is Solon. And he comes into power in Athens in 594 BCE, so that we have kind of a fixation point. What he's going to do is he's inheriting an Athens that's in chaos. Athens is in chaos because of two factors. Because of a series of economic problems, many people who used to own their own property have either had to sell it to rich people to maintain themselves, or in a series of bad debt transactions have actually lost their property to the elite. So they essentially have gone bankrupt. Right? So we have two factors there to think about. Solon is coming into a situation where there is essentially an economic war going on between the wealthy and the poor. And that in each case, the problem is that the system is not going to end well. If there's a hyper-concentration of all wealth in the hands of a small group of people, it seems very doubtful that there could be anything other than an oligarchy or maybe a monarchy. If, on the other hand, the system is such that all the poor people who have gone deep into debt can get all their property back and essentially destroy the economy that way, then there might be some kind of democracy, but it will be based on some sort of understanding that no real debt obligation, no real law exists except the will of the majority. I know that's sort of oversimplifying things, but I want you to read carefully in your text that this is an opportunity here. Athens has to make something that's very difficult. Now, we all live in a world of extreme politics of various kinds and forms around the world. Compromise, the idea of finding a middle ground, on some kind of political idea or religious or economic is in many ways very, very difficult. I mean, even within our own family structures or friend structures, compromise is tricky, right? So to think that the Athenians could come to some sort of compromise where the rich could still have their land and the poor could get their land back seems to be almost impossible. But here's what Solon said. He said, okay, listen, everybody who has lost their property through debt is going to get it back. All right? And everybody who has now given over even more debts, you're going to have to be able to somehow pay those. Okay? I know it sounds slightly confusing, but here's the idea. Solon is not giving the wealthy exactly what they want. He's not giving the poorest what they want. He's striking a compromise right down the middle. It may or may not solve the problems in Athens. There's no guarantees here. But looking at the situation, he was very fearful that either track was going to destroy Athens. And so he puts that out there as the first attempt at a compromise politic, right? Take a look at some of the details in your text. As we move forward in Athens, the problems don't magically go away. And Athenian politics in this century is very unstable, after Solon all the way down to the end of the century here, where we're going to now have the famous Athenian politician Cleisthenes, right? It's hard to pronounce. But he is going to be the one who's also going to try and create more genuine democracy. He's going to be looking at the scenarios of how the city functions. He's going to try and find ways to make sure everyone can participate. But mind you, remember, both in Spartan and Athenian history, these are both city-states that are going to be built on slavery. They are both going to be city-states where the role of women, even if they are citizens, is greatly diminished. They do not have open political rights. And in each of these places, the controlling interest has generally been the large business owners, the landowners in Athens, or in the case of Sparta, the military leaders and the military families. In each case, the Spartan polis and the Athenian polis are each trying to develop a system of government that works. The Spartans have chosen very clearly the military state. The Athenians don't go that route. Athenian history is more the history of compromise. It is the history of trial and error in politics, and it is a history of very rapid changes in multiple ways. While Sparta stays extremely stable for the most part, Athens, as it moves towards democracy, be much more unstable. Not in the sense that it's going to be horrible, but there's going to be lots of trial and error, which somehow is maybe the ultimate sign of a democracy. All right? So please go back into your textbook, review this section, and also take a close look at some of the sample questions to make sure you see the long-term development in both the Spartan and the Athenian polis, and make sure you understand the differences between the two.